Well, for more on the world's changing landscape of startups, it's only fitting we head to Silicon Valley. We're joined by Rob Enderle, President and Principal Analyst at the Enderle Group. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, when you look at the more successful startup ecosystems, what factors do they have in common?
Well, a lot of ready money, the critical mass of engineers, hardware, software, and specialist talent needed to put together a company that will do something amazing, something that will attract the interest of investors, and an environment where people want to live or have to live in some cases. So you get all of the aspects you need to have to not only start a company, but to build a company.
Now, are there any particular countries or regions that you see that are creating the best sort of business environment for startups?
Well, there's a thought. Outside of the U.S., Israel probably would be my first pick. A lot of incentives to do it there, both financial and positional. It's a country always under stress and chasing technology, a lot of it military technology, to advance outside of their area of concern, or to better protect themselves, I guess is what I want to say. And so there's a tremendous amount of motivation to advance that drifts well down into the populace, and a substantial amount of money flowing in to help them to do that. But it's fairly specialized, and much of the activity is somewhere related to defense, maybe networking, maybe observation, certainly artificial intelligence, but a lot of activity there. Korea's always had a lot of money focused on trying to move ahead, and in fact, having Samsung as kind of a national hero as a company certainly helps the aspirations towards technology. And Japan, of course, has just recently put a lot of resources in trying to rebuild a Silicon Valley out there. And I guess my last choice would be Russia. Russia is putting a tremendous amount of effort into really coming up with a challenger here. And surprisingly enough, while a lot of what we see coming out of there tend to be viruses and some nasty stuff, it is awfully creative, and the talent there in some areas is unmatched.
Now, in terms of starting a business outside Silicon Valley, what would you say are some of the benefits for not being based in Silicon Valley?
Well, you don't have a lot of the pressures of the valley. This is a very high-priced area to live. The traffic is horrible to get around, so you lose a lot of time going to and from. It makes startups in garages a lot more attractive because you don't actually have to commute any place. So the fact is, if you can go someplace where the living environment is perhaps a little bit less stressful, you can focus more on what you want to do and a little bit less on trying to get there, and certainly in paying exorbitant bills in terms of having to live here. You can also do things like develop relationships that are perhaps a bit deeper with the folks that you're around, because you're a bit more isolated from just the overall tech environment. And that tends to form tighter groups. It can form tighter groups and tighter organizations. Oh, and finally, by being someplace else, less likely that your team or parts of your team will be immediately recruited someplace else, because if that happens, they have to relocate, and people tend to not like to relocate. So you're better able to hold your teams together often if you're not here.
Now, that may be the case, definitely in the initial stages, but what about as a country wants to hire some senior management or is trying to work on the scalability? Will they still have the same benefits, or would they end up, you think, moving closer to Silicon Valley?
Well, right now, even though we were talking about development outside of Silicon Valley, this is still the place to be as you move up into an organization, because there's simply more opportunity here right now. So there lies the difficulty. Is often upwardly mobile managers want to go someplace where they have the best opportunity to advance, and that typically is where the most job opportunity exists. So very different from founders, though. Often founders want to take their product from cradle to grave and deliver it to the market, and they're not that motivated to change jobs. But once you've passed that threshold, once the company is sold, once the company expands, once those founders leave to go to greener pastures, then retaining people in one of the other countries becomes very difficult, largely because the job opportunities in terms of numbers actually exist more of them exist here.
Now, Rob, just to wrap up, even in Silicon Valley, failure is a very real option. There's even an annual FailCon convention where startups embrace their failures. Do you think that the startup boom will go the same way as the dot-com boom?
Well, so the dot-com boom and bust really had to do with the fact that we had a lot of companies that put .com in their name, and that was their single greatest asset. They didn't even know how to spell profit, and so the boom was largely artificial. There was no financial foundation on it. In fact, its mirror was the property collapse, the economic collapse that occurred here also a decade or so later. When you break financial rules, you're going to have problems. I don't expect to see that happen. At least we're not that close. We've got a bit of an overheated market with regard to startups at the moment, but that hasn't translated into companies that are trading publicly. So I don't think we're going to have that same cause and effect, at least not near term.
Okay.
Long term, who knows? We have a tendency of forgetting stuff long term, and then making the same mistake again. But right now, we don't seem to be vulnerable to it. Not like we were with .coms.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.